Section 14.2, root versus base. This is a really important concept, and if you master it now, then the rest of the chapter will be much easier for you. So the root of a triad, as you might recall, is the note that's on the bottom when the triad is in its most basic form, which is called root position. So we have a set of chords. All of these are triads in root position, as their notes all follow the pattern line, 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 or space, space, space. So here we've got space note, space note, space note, space note, space note, space note, line note, line note, line note, and so on. And I should be clear here, it's 3 consecutive space notes or 3 consecutive line notes. So these constructions should look pretty familiar to you because you've been building chords in root position actually all along thus far. So this next exercise simply asks you to name the root of these triads. So what you need to do is to, first of all, evaluate the chord. Does it fit that definition of root position? Does it have line, 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 or space, space, space? And if it does, then the bottom note is therefore the root of the chord. So here we go. Space note, space note, space note. So the bottom note is going to be the root. So the root is therefore A flat. Line note, line note, line note. Bottom note is E. So E is therefore the root. Line note, line note, line note. D is the bottom. So D is the root. Space note, space note, space note. Yep, checks out. C sharp is therefore the root. Space note, space note, line note. So this is not in root position. So you cannot assume that the bottom note is going to be your root. So your answer here is simply not A. It's not that note there. If you were clever, you perhaps figured out that F sharp is indeed the root. We're going to cover that method a little bit later in this chapter. But for right now, just know that the root is the bottom note when you have that triad in root position. If it's not in root position, all bets are off. So let's go to the next page. So composers don't restrict themselves simply to triads in root position. Instead, they're going to use triads in other positions besides root position. So let's see that in practice right now. All of these things right here are C major triads. And what do we mean by that? Well, a C major triad has the notes C, E, and G in it. That's the defining feature of a C major triad. Now, you can put those notes in any order, but as long as you've got a C, an E, and a G, you are still dealing with a C major triad. So what we have in this example is a bunch of C major triads, but they're in different inversions, which means that the order of the notes from bottom to top is different in each case. So let's check these out one by one. The first one, let's evaluate its position. We've got line note, line note, line note. So that means it's in root position, right? And we have the notes C, E, and G. So therefore, C is our root. That's our normal configuration. Now, what about this next configuration? Line note, space note. And in terms of the notes from bottom to top, E, G, and C. Okay, so it's clearly not in root position because we don't have that pattern, but we still have the same collection of pitches. We still have a C, we still have an E, we still have a G. They're just scrambled up in order from bottom to top. Now, what about this last one? We've got line note, space note, space note. So it's also not in root position. And from bottom to top, the notes are G, C, and E. So again, it's still the same C major triad. We still have a C, an E, and a G. We just have reordered the pitches from bottom to top. Now, the fancy way to describe these chords is that, yes, this one is in root position. This next one is called first inversion, and this last one is called second inversion. Now, let's go over this concept of root versus base, which is the focus for this section. So here's a definition. The base, and this will make, I think, intuitive sense to you. The base of a chord is whatever note is on the bottom, no matter if you're in root position or one of these inversions. So whatever you see to be the bottom note is the base. Now, the root, as you recall, is whatever note is on the bottom when you're in root position only. Otherwise, as I said, all bets are off. So that means, therefore, as you can imagine, that the root and the base are going to be sometimes the same and sometimes different. So let's evaluate these chords here together. This first one we're familiar with already. We've got line, 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 and we've got the notes C, E, and G. So it's in root position. That means the bottom note is the root. And just looking at the chord on the page, the bottom note is C. So the base is C. Now let's evaluate the bass in these other two chords. The bass, as we said, is whatever note's on the bottom, no matter what configuration you're in. So the bass of this chord is that bottom note, so it's E. The bass of this chord is that bottom note, which is G. Now, how do we determine the root for these things? Well, what we do is we look at the pitches that are involved. There's an E, there's a G, and there's a C. That just reduces to good old C, E, G. So that means C is still our root. It's still a C major triad because we're involving the same letters. Over here, we've got G, C, and E. That's also a C major triad because we can reorder those to fit that pattern of C, E, and G. So the root for this one is also C. So sometimes the root and the bass are the same, that is when you're in root position, but sometimes they are different from one another.